All right, we're back here with our part two of the NBA midseason review here with Kyle and Sam. What's
Howdy.
up?
Yup.
All right, so we talked about the teams and the challenges of the Miami Heat and three-peating, and now we're going to talk about the players and some of the great performances of this compiled midseason. And we're going to start off with the MVP race. Every year it's a very fascinating subject, and this year even more so. LeBron is pretty clearly the best player in the league, but Kevin Durant is making a run at that number one spot. Without a doubt. He's had a great run recently of 30-point games. He had a triple-double on Sunday. Tonight he had 41 and a come from behind win against the Atlanta Hawks. He dropped 50 points and 48. He didn't match Carmelo's 62, but with Melo's team being so bad, what Melo's doing, in my opinion, having his best season overall, is kind of irrelevant. Kevin Durant has played without his second-best player, another top 10 player in the league, Russell Westbrook. He's having his best statistical season. His shooting is right where it needs to be. His rebounds are up. Assists are up. Turnovers are about the same. Steals and blocks are up. And the team is number one seed in the West right now. And even missing Westbrook, they haven't missed a beat. So Kyle, Sam, who wants to go first, talking about Durant's season?
I think Durant's having an incredible season, but if you've been paying any attention to sports lately, you already know that. So there's not much more you can say about the Slim Reaper, as I've recently been informed. So I'm going to go ahead and just usher the conversation, if that's okay with Sam, into maybe the number 2 and 3, or 3 and 4 conversation, because you can always say LeBron's going to be that guy, number 2.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's not number 1, he's number 2 until he drops.
No, go for it. 3 and 4, that's where it gets interesting.
Yeah, so I think the most compelling arguments right now are going to be between like 3 players, in my mind at least. I look at Paul George, Stephen Curry, and LaMarcus Aldridge as being probably the most pivotal players vying for that number 3 spot. While guys like Kevin Love have a little bit better stats, they don't have the team wins, and that's a big aspect of the most valuable player is how much are you changing the culture of your team. It's not just about the numbers you put up, it's about the other effects that you have on the franchise. Granted, I won't say that it's his fault that the GM's made a lot of lackluster moves, but for this conversation only, we're going to look at the guy who's dropping 23.1 points per game for Golden State, shooting more three-pointers than anybody else in the league. Granted, it's at his lowest three-point clip he's ever shot at, almost 5% lower than he has in the recent seasons. It's really actually kind of hurting his ability to be ranked as one of the best three-point shooters of all time. But I'm sure he'll take the win. So, besides that, you got Paul George here, or you got Blake Griffin maybe coming out, LaMarcus Aldridge. What do you think, Sam?
Honestly, right now, I see between, like you said, Paul George and Stephen Curry. If you go, it matters how you go and define it. If you're talking about MVP, well, look at it. If you take Paul George off of Indiana, no, they're not the same team. But that's definitely a team that's going to be able to get 500 or better from the rest of the season. That's if you're in some sort of doomsday scenario where he's out the rest of the season.
Very true.
They're going to be able to figure out. However, if you take Stephen Curry out of Golden State, yes, they have places and he's not carrying the team on the back, but he is definitely the keystone to that offense. In order for them to be going, you need Stephen Curry to be getting, like you said, that high 20 average, those 30-point boosts, stuff like that.
9 assists.
What's that? No, that's the biggest part is the 9 assists. I want to say the next closest in assists to Stephen Curry is gonna be Klay Thompson, which is at like 3, maybe 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by going to that definition, it's got to be Stephen Curry. That, and with the fact that like past 3-4 years with all his injuries and stuff, he's been flying so below the radar to where everyone thought, wow, he's a great 3-point shooter in the playoffs. No, that was bad 3-point shooting for him.
Yeah.
If he deserves it. Like, yeah, look at him in 3 years.
Yep. And also, top 10 steals. Not the greatest defender, but I mean the guy's doing it in a lot of different aspects.
Definitely.
A few things I'd like to add to the third, fourth, fifth issue. Two of my favorite stats, while no stat is perfect, one of my favorite is the player efficiency rating made by John Hollinger, which you can find on ESPN.com. Credit. Number 1 in the league, Durant, 30.98. Number 2, LeBron, 28.76. So that's just another way where you can see that Durant is a little bit better than LeBron so far. And the other stat is estimated wins added, where Durant is at 17 and LeBron's at 14.4. Like I said, no stance perfect, but this is the first year where Durant's been above LeBron in both of those stats, so it's something very interesting to look at. And in terms of who I think is next in line, I would go Paul George based off the fact that he is so much better defensively than Curry and LaMarcus, and the fact that he is the best player on arguably the best team in the league. And this award is not the best player award, or else Michael Jordan would have won about 12 of these things, and Shaq would have had 4, and then Duncan would have had 2, and then Kobe would have had 5, then LeBron would have had like 6 in a row. It's about most valuable, and it's easy to argue about the difference between best player and most valuable, but in terms of context, to me, when I think of most valuable, I think of who is most important to their team in this season, in this moment, which is something that Sam kind of brought up. And I feel like I would go Paul George, Stephen Curry, and then LaMarcus. Now, the main reason I bump LaMarcus down, even though he has a better player efficiency rating than Stephen Curry, is because his team is better, in my opinion, overall with the talent surrounding him than Stephen Curry, just because he has Nicholas Batum, he has Damian Lillard, he has Wes Matthews, he has a better bench, he has Robin Lopez defending the rim. Where both teams are good, I feel like LaMarcus has a little bit more help on offense, and that especially bumps up your player efficiency rating a bit, because when you just shoot a high percentage, get easy looks, you can have anomalies like Brandon Wright of Dallas, who is at 22.89 and is 13th in the league. He's not the 13th best player, even though he has value on the team. So it's just interesting to look at all these stats and really analyze how they interchange, and then use your eyes to value defense and team concepts and things like that. So anything else we'd like to add? Perhaps if Chris Paul didn't get hurt, how he'd be the clear-cut number 3 in my mind.
Yeah, he probably would have been. Right now, it stands to reason that Blake Griffin's kind of moving his way into that conversation too. I mean,
A little bit, yeah.
If you take Blake Griffin off of the Clippers and you play Chris Paul, hypothetically, I don't know if they're not a better team with just Blake Griffin than they are with just Chris Paul.
That's an interesting discussion.
Because the Clippers don't have anybody else. They have literally nobody that could play Blake Griffin's position. Whereas, at least you kind of can make up for that gap with Darren Collison and Redick and all the ball handlers in Jamal Crawford that you've kind of accumulated.
Yeah, definitely I would agree. Chris Paul changed the culture.
Right.
With the
I'm
Clippers.
in no way taking anything away from him.
Yeah, he definitely changed the culture. As per how we're talking about most valuable player, if you take them away, what happens? I feel Clippers actually have a weird conundrum where it's a 3-player thing. If you take DeAndre Jordan out of that, you have a major dip in performance just because of the loss of rebounds and just the
defensive culture change without DeAndre would be huge. You know, Blake cannot, he can jump out of the gym, but he doesn't block shots. He can't protect the rim. That's not in his nature. Maybe he can develop that, but that's what DeAndre does. That's why he's there. Just like, even though they're still playing very well and scoring at a high rate without Chris Paul, if they don't have Chris Paul in the playoffs, they have 0 shot. None.
No.
And without Blake Griffin, he might be the hardest one to replace out of the 3, because at least with DeAndre, you can find a 7-foot guy that can't do nothing on offense, but they can grab a few rebounds and get some, blocks. And like Kyle said, with, Darren Collison, they have someone who can at least play point guard. He's actually backed up Chris Paul before in New Orleans when he blew out his knee and had a very good season, and that's why people thought Collison was going to be a lot more of a potential starting point guard in a really good team. So it's really interesting to think that while Chris Paul, in my mind, is clearly the better player, Blake Griffin might be more important to that team in terms of going forward, especially winning a title. Yeah. So we'd like to touch on the other awards really quick. Almost all the ESPN experts are giving a Defensive Player of the Year to Roy Hibbert. Any disagreements? I completely agree with that.
I think he's had a great season.
I mean, like we said, DeAndre's been very good. I'd like to bring him up. Paul George has been fantastic on the wing. Can't discount LeBron. Anthony Davis leading the league in blocks.
He's probably the biggest challenger.
If their team was better, I would agree. But I think it's Hibbert's to lose, and he's not going to lose it. So.
Yeah, it's difficult, one, with how we go and track defense and stuff like that, lack of stats in there. It's difficult when your team's not doing well to be able to tell how much your defense is affecting it, because one of the reasons your team's not doing well is your lack of team defense.
Yeah, and your communication, even if you're a great player, like maybe Davis can block a lot of shots, but he's not a Tyson Chandler or a Kevin Garnett type communicator, especially back would switch the screen or something like that, and that's a huge issue with team defense, like Sam said.
And that's something that comes with experience.
Yeah, he's second, third-year player, and he had a major injury, he missed some time, so.
On this very subject, defensive rating, by the way, the Pacers have 5 players in the top 10. The Bulls have 4 players in the top 20. San Antonio Spurs have 3 players in the top 20. Goes to show you what wins championships.
Yeah, I feel like that also goes to show
It's a moving
what helps
trend
you
in the
build your
NBA.
team around. All three of those teams have a defensive anchor in the middle, and Noah, Hibbert, and Duncan. They all have great team concepts and great coaches, defensive minds. Vogel has good offensive success, but he came from a defensive background. Tom Thibodeau obviously was the defensive mastermind behind Doc Rivers' Celtics championships team. And Greg Popovich is the best coach in the league. I mean, at this point, other coaches might be better, but he has the everyone picks him. He's in San Antonio. You would just expect them to have 50 wins.
Well, and how long has he been doing it?
Yeah, he's the longest tenured coach, perhaps in professional sports, in the top 3 major sports. Active right now. Yeah,
Active, yeah.
One of them. Yeah.
So if the Bulls were healthy and winning, I feel like Noah would get a little bit more credit. But like we said with the MVP, if your team's not winning, you pretty much have no shot unless you have an ungodly season, like a LeBron type
He's
season.
the Belichick of the NBA.
He could be, yeah, and he's longer tenured.
Yeah.
Pretty
close.
Yeah. So a more interesting discussion, something we were talking about a lot today, would be most improved player. My vote goes to one of my favorite players in the league, Lance Stevenson. We talked about him in the team breakdown. Lance is really fantastic. Improved his rebounding and shooting percentage, scoring, assists per game, and his on-ball defense has got more intense and even better. Lance has really showed up and really improved himself. And I'd like to mention a couple other players just to get everyone thinking about other options. DeMarcus Cousins, all-star this year, maybe on the fringe of a top 10 player, improved all of his numbers, his efficiency, turnovers down, steals are up, blocks up. The team still isn't that good. There's numerous issues for that. Isaiah Thomas is a great player. Maybe shouldn't be starting with his gunning ways and lack of defense. The Rudy Gay trade, Rudy Gay is playing well, and they still aren't really winning that much, which is interesting because he usually isn't playing this good. He had 40 points last week. And another player I would like to mention is he won't get it, but I feel like he's playing way better than he ever has, is Goran Dragic of the Phoenix Suns. All of his numbers are a lot better. His assists are down, but his team is playing way better. Jeff Hornacek, out of nowhere, just being one of the best coaches in the league. No true stars, very few lottery picks. They have a good amount of first-round picks with the Morris twins, and Dragic, I believe, is a first-round pick, and Channing Frye was back in the day, but they're just running a very high-tempo system and getting a lot of things done, and Goran Dragic, even with the loss of Eric Bledsoe, is playing extremely well. So, Kyle, would you like to mention anyone else and maybe your vote for most improved player?
Yeah, I would like to say I agree with you. I think Goran Dragic has been great this year. Who would have thought this guy could score 19 points a game and shoot 45 from 3? I wouldn't have guessed that, but I've always seen that type of potential in this game, and I think it was a very smart decision by them to try and bring in both of those guards. And it's kind of interesting how Dragic's kind of evolved into a shooting guard, something not a lot of people are talking about. Another player who I'd like to bring up, and I know is one of your personal boys, Isaiah Thomas. We've always known him to be a great isolation scorer, but he's really shown up in a lot of PER rankings. The guy he's 16 out of the entire NBA in player efficiency rating. He's good in stealing. We all know he can't defend, but when you've got DeMarcus Cousins in the middle, you kind of assume that's somewhat part of the game plan is to let them get to him.
He's also a lot smaller, though, and you don't like to use size as an excuse, and they never would. Anyone would in that situation, but it does help to be that one of those 6'4", lengthy, super athletic players on defense like Rajon Rondo. And when you're talking about someone like Isaiah Thomas on defense, it's really hard to keep up defensively when you're 5'9", 180.
You're just not gonna get. You're gonna get ran over. You're just not gonna get in the way.
He's been having a great season. Props to him. I would have never. I didn't see this coming. So I always thought he had the inside game, kind of like Rondo, but I wasn't really sure that he could get open enough, given his size, to really make that leap as far as 20 points a game.
Exactly.
Yeah. The obvious pick, yes, it is Lance Stevenson. Heart-wise, I am with the DeMarcus Cousins argument, just because realize, when this guy, remember him at Kentucky? Remember his first year? This was a guy we weren't sure was going to be able to survive in the league.
Yep.
Because all the emotional growth. This is a guy who got kicked out of practice. And now, he's pretty much running the team. He's being the backbone for his team. And also, we touched on him a little bit earlier, DeAndre Jordan. Whenever your rebounds per game jump 5 rebounds per game, my God. I mean, DeAndre Jordan needs to be one of those guys where we go, man, he's going to be good, he's getting there, and we just had a discussion about how key he is to the Clippers.
Yep.
I mean, I think he's a guy who deserves to maybe not get that award over someone like Lance Stevenson, but yeah, tip of the hat.
Yeah, absolutely. DeAndre's been much better than I was expecting. And one thing I'd like to point out before we move on to Coach of the Year and maybe a bigger umbrella topic of some of our favorite coaches, best coaches, is DeMarcus Cousins has improved his points per game by 5, his field goal percentage by 20%, his rebounds by 2, his blocks by 0.5, and his steals by 0.5. So obviously the numbers back up the player efficiency rating and what you're seeing on the court and what you're hearing from writers and beat writers about his attitude and leadership developing.
20%.
So, exactly. With that
That's
said,
amazing.
Coach of the Year, I feel like is very interesting because you have some potential favorites and runaway people that you look for the team record and you're like, number 1 team in the league, Frank Vogel, Indiana. They've really developed. They developed their own players. Vogel runs great sets. We saw him hanging in with Eric Spoelstra. Eric Spoelstra again without Dwayne Wade. Obviously he has LeBron, but some of their defensive concepts and offensive sets have really changed the way basketball's played a bit in terms, and the other coaches are really recently have adapted a lot of their sets and screens and movements and defensive switches, and he's really brought that to the game. And then you look on the other spectrum of teams that aren't at the top but have played very well, and you got to think about someone I just mentioned like Jeff Hornacek, and no one, including Phoenix, I don't feel like, thought they were going to be this good. And I mean, some of that evidence is at before the season starts, they trade their starting center, Mauricio Gortat, who's had a very solid season with Washington, for a first-round pick, and Emeka Okafor's expiring contract. And all of a sudden, they're sitting there at the 7th seed, scoring lots of points a game. They have a plus point differential in the West. And you got to think, like, how much is that is, great management, and how much is it Jeff Hornacek just really knowing what he's doing? I really think that my top 3 would be Frank Vogel, Jeff Hornacek, and then I would probably follow it up with Tom Thibodeau. Now, I know you're thinking Thibodeau, 5th seed Chicago,
Yeah.
but they were only 500. But you got to remember, no Derrick Rose. His favorite player in the entire league is probably Lou Aldane, who Chicago's like, oh, let's save money on the tax and just trade him to Cleveland, who's still not in the playoffs. More on them and later. And he's still like, I'm mad, you trade my favorite player. I'm going to make sure that I just ruin this management situation for the future because there's heavy rumors that he's going to get fired in the offseason, which would be the dumbest thing they could do unless he just really wants to leave.
Of all the problems the Chicago Bulls have had, Tom Thibodeau is not one of them.
No, I mean, he's made Boozer a passable defender. If you watch anyone or listen to anyone,
defensive rankings.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing on defense. He understands the concepts, and I really feel like he needs a little bit of credit, and he should be in the top 5 at the very least. If you want to give some bonus points to Scott Brooks, for holding the team together without Russell Westbrook, I can totally see that argument. Or, like I said, Spoelstra for, keeping Miami going and still winning. But I just want Tom Thibodeau to get some recognition. And Kyle or Sam, whoever wants to go.
With Thibodeau, definitely, I think with Thibodeau, it's one of those things where I will have a better support of that once we see what they're looking like closer to the end of the season. But so often we go and give someone Coach of the Year honors based off the success you're having with that team. But I think also something like you're saying needs to be said about perseverance. This is your 2nd year in a row without someone who at their tip top is in that discussion of top 10, maybe even top 5 players in the NBA. Losing a player like that to your team absolutely crushes morale. And he's keeping them in the run. And that comes down to the coach, keeping the ship going, keeping everything there. So, now on to silly ideas. Right now, Brooklyn Nets started off terrible. No, what if? We're going into the wild what ifs. If Brooklyn Nets end up being 4th, maybe even 3rd best team in the East.
They're only 3 games back, folks.
3 games back with how terrible it was. I absolutely hated this decision, but do you have to question maybe kid, maybe perhaps, especially if they get past the 2nd round.
It's some interesting
to
look at.
Discussion.
Yep.
He's always been regarded as a great NBA mind. you know. So it's not like you can't say this came from nowhere. I mean, the only question about him was, can you really get these guys that you literally just played against last year to respect you enough to go out there and play hard every night?
Well, because you don't make that
That's
sort
hard.
Yeah, you don't make that sort of switch off from player to head coach.
It's difficult.
You get years
Even
of
Mark
assistant.
Jackson had a horrible year with Golden
And
State their first
he was
year.
4 years out of the league doing announcing with JVG,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, watching
Different situation
watching
still.
the game.
Yeah.
Like
He had time to prepare, and his season wasn't.
I mean,
that
shoot,
good.
look at Brian Shaw. He's still stuck in this.
Yeah, he should have gotten an opportunity
He
long
should've.
before Denver this year. He really should have. And I love Brian Shaw. And one thing I would mention on the Jason Kidd thing, is it Kidd or is it just them getting healthy? Because as soon as they got Kirilenko back, their defensive rating jumped by about 14%.
That's a great point.
Because he was able to do a lot of the switches with KG. Paul Pierce has gotten a little bit healthier. They've rested him and KG very well. When they went to London, KG didn't even fly on the plane. He stayed in the States. Joe Johnson, even though he might be one of the most overplayed players in the league, I'm not a big fan. Has had a really good year, especially shooting the ball. And
Point.
yeah, I mean he's running those half court sets kind of like Lance, and he did that in Atlanta. And Jason Kidd has realized that Joe Johnson's more assertive if he has the ball in his hands, and that's really easy to do when Deron Williams is out of the game all the time. So that's something, if he can come back and ever be anything close to what he was. Does everyone remember Chris Paul, Deron Williams? How some people thought it was Deron Williams? Because that argument's pretty much irrelevant at this point.
Yeah.
It looked close though.
It
By
was
all
interesting.
respects,
He
looked
was
close.
good. I'm harping on him a bit, but
feel
he
like
was a good player. He was a great player.
I feel like the main comparison there was Chris Paul's knee, though. Was who's going to end up being better because you had so many questions about Chris Paul's knee.
Right. It's funny
Williams
because
is so healthy and it seemed
he's
like the arrow
healthier
was
than Chris
only-
Paul now. Because before this shoulder injury, he was missing more games with Chris Paul since the knee.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's a separated shoulder, so it's
Ironic
kind of a
how
freak
it
injury.
goes,
Yeah.
but still.
Kyle, is there any coaches you'd like to add before we go on to our next topic?
Well, it wouldn't be fair to not mention Terry Stotts, would it?
Absolutely
I mean,
not.
Blazers have been doing pretty good, and you can attribute that to a bench. You can attribute that to more mature players. Hell, you can attribute it to Damian Lillard practicing with Gary Payton in the offseason. I don't really care what you want to say, but it takes a coach to get this team together, and he's calling the right plays, he's running the right sets, he's getting the right players involved, and I think he's done a tremendous job. Also, Mark Jackson, who I know Sam was eager to mention, but, you know, it's kind of hard in a year like this when there's some top-tier candidates to really sift through.
Yeah.
That and I couldn't resist.
And they haven't really had the injury yet, but obviously Terry Stotts, you're giving him credit because of how bad they were last year.
Yeah.
But still, you know, interesting candidate. I wouldn't be surprised to see him take it home, you know, especially if they win 55, 57 games.
Yeah. One name I'd like to mention before we move on to our next topic of kind of arguing player versus player, which is something people always like to do, which is kind of, you know, a hard thing to ever get an answer on, but it's something fun to talk about, is this coach has taken the 25th defensive ranked team last year and brought them up, last I checked, to 8th defensively. Steve Clifford at the Charlotte Bobcats. They're the 8th seed in the East. I know the East sucks, but look at that roster. And they have very few players that you would count on. Al Jefferson's having a great year, and he's playing very well defensively, and that was the big knock in Minnesota and Utah, is this dude is just useless defensively. MKG can't shoot, and he's still a really viable player because he's crashing the glass and playing good D. Kemba Walker is very inefficient, but he's still playing great defense. I just feel like the Bobcats, with all their faults and their bad draft picks, and no one wants to go there, and Jordan, is he a horrible owner? It doesn't matter. Steve Clifford is a great coach, first year, and I hope that they don't cut the cord way too soon when they realize they don't have that good of an offense. I just hope that he gets a chance 3-4 years to try to build something down there in Charlotte.
No, he definitely went and took a team that was, let's face it, a team that was a joke, and making him half-ass respectable. And that's
I feel like you guys are underrating Bismack Biyombo.
I was just going to ask, who is the worst pick, Bismack Biyombo or Hashim Thabit? I know if Thabit went second, but they've both been pretty useless. I mean,
I feel like Biyombo's still like 21, though, right?
Assuming he didn't lie about his age,
Thabit's
like Fausto Carmona?
25 or now.
Bismack is supposedly 21.
Okay.
Supposedly, so, you know, who knows there. But,
Right.
like I said, now we're going to transition into a player versus player. These are some arguments I've seen on the internet and some I've had with friends at work and at school and family. And we just like to run through some of these right now, and I'm going to name off the matchups. Sam and Kyle are going to talk about the players really quick. I'm going to put in my 2 cents, and we're going to move on to the next one. So the first one I've heard a lot of talk about on the radio and the internet. Best power forward in the league, LaMarcus Aldridge, Kevin Love. Go at it.
All right. So let's start with K Love. All right, so K Love is 4th in the NBA points per game, 25. 2nd in rebounds, 13. His point differential is 7.7. Now, true, I will give Aldridge the give on defense. He has better defensive play than Kevin Love, but Kevin Love is one of those players who steps out of the position in that he's more than a power forward. He has worse field goal percentage than LaMarcus Aldridge, but he's also attempting 6 3-pointers and making a good amount of them. Don't necessarily have that. That and most basic thing, what happened when the two went against each other. December 17th, Kevin Love, 29 points, Aldridge 15. Kevin Love, 15 points, Aldridge 12 points. 9 assists. Caleb, Aldridge, 3 assists. Now, Caleb did have 4 turnovers. 2 of them did end up being because of Aldridge. But Minnesota did a really good job of going rotating, getting the mismatch, and getting Caleb on there. That, and also I feel Caleb's postgame is something that is kind of underestimated these days. The dude's got moves. He doesn't necessarily get separation with a fadeaway J, but the way he does his hook, he does get separation still from the guy he's playing.
All right, well, it's great that you took K-Love because this is going to make an interesting conversation. I would personally opt for LaMarcus Aldridge. Now, I usually like this player efficiency rating. It's a good basis to start any conversation with. So you've got Kevin Love at 27. You've got LaMarcus Aldridge at 23.2. That tells you there's a 4-point difference. So if you're looking at that stat alone, you're going to think Kevin Love's a better player. Here's where you're wrong. Kevin Love is attempting 6 3-pointers a game. Why? Because your offensive team is bad. That's just a prime example of how Kevin Love has inflated stats. If you're talking about LaMarcus Aldridge standing on the 3-point line waiting for Lillard to catch and shoot him the ball, I'm not saying he's shooting for the same percentage, but then again, they're different players. The thing about LaMarcus Aldridge is that you can throw this guy the ball in the low post. You can throw it on the high, you can throw it on the low elbow, doesn't matter left or right, he's going to shoot it from the exact same percentage. Doesn't matter who you guard him with, he's going to back up 2 steps just like he always does. He's going to pull the dirt fade, he's going to pull a hook. You really don't know what he's going to pull, but the point is that he can make every single play from that low post position. And that, my friends, is the highest percentage shot in basketball outside of LeBron James' drive. So, asking yourself that question, you see that Kevin Love obviously has more rebounds, but granted he's given a lot more opportunity to get rebounds given the emergence of Lopez and them rotating him more of a leak role, as they call it, instead of playing the crash the boards role that Kevin Love so desperately feasts on. So it's an interesting conversation. I definitely think if I had to start a team, I would take Kevin Love because he's the more versatile player, and he's obviously a little bit younger. But at the same time, LaMarcus Aldridge, if I had to take a player this season, I'm taking LaMarcus Aldridge.
Okay, I'll put in a few 2 cents for me. Kevin Love is a more versatile offensive player. He's a great rebounder. He brings a lot to the table. I think he's a better creator than LaMarcus. I feel like if you need someone to make a great pass, K-Love is going to bring that to the table, whereas LaMarcus is kind of iffy. And then with LaMarcus, I feel like he's much, much better on defense just because of his ability to switch on the pick and rolls. He's a little bit longer and lengthier to defend the rim a bit, whereas with Lopez, he doesn't need to do that as much now, but he has that ability, whereas K-Love, you can look at their defensive stats as team-wise, and their thing that everyone says he's a top 10 player that never made the playoffs. I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that Kevin Love's not great on defense, and then the team thing, they've never put a great defensive center next to him. I love Pekovic, but he should be his own main post player on offense, and they should. A trade that would never happen, what would benefit Minnesota, maybe not Houston, is Pekovic for Omar Asik. Asik is the type of player that you need next to Kevin Love. Get the rebounds that K-Love can't get, block shots, defend the paint, defend the pick and roll, be that kind of quiet defensive leader.
Don't have plays called for you.
Exactly. Like Pekovic, they feed the post. He's really good down there, but Kevin Love, you have to score. You have Kevin Martin to shoot on the outside. You have Ricky Rubio, who hopefully one day can shoot over 35% for a season. And if you have a Sheik there, you can really transition Kevin Love to be more of the secondary main defender in the post. She can take on the Dwight Howards and the Chris Bosches and the LaMarcus Aldridge, for this conversation. So to me, if I wanted a player to have for this season or next season, I would probably take LaMarcus because of his defensive advantage. But due to the age gap, where I believe LaMarcus is 27-28 and Caleb's 23-24, yeah, give or take. I know Kevin Love is at least 2-3 years younger than LaMarcus. I would probably take Kevin Love long term. It's going to be very interesting to see when he opts out in 2 years what's going to happen. I think he's going to the Lakers. I think it's set in stone. I think there's no way around that, and it's going to be really interesting to see if that happens. So that's my 2 cents. So.
Caleb in LA would be a zoo.
Yeah.
Depends on who they get, though.
He went to UCLA. What?
That's a good point, but it depends on who they get, because you're looking at a 36-year-old Kobe. At that point, you may not want to go there, but I agree with you that LA is definitely looking like they're ready.
Last thing Kevin Love would want to do is leave Minnesota Timberwolves teams where they're starting to get things together, and let's go back 2 steps with this Lakers team that's a mess,
and be under the limelight and get 500 times the amount of ridicule.
Exactly.
Yeah. So to our next hot topic, this has become another very interesting topic, also about who's the best of their position in the league with the emergence of a more younger star to challenge the wily veteran. Best point guard in the league, Stephen Curry of Golden State, Chris Paul of the Clippers. Obviously, it's a little bit hard to talk about because Chris Paul has been out for about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I believe, with his separated shoulder. But Kyle, you want to go first, and Sam went first last time. Pick your position, defend it.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting conversation. You've got Chris Paul as the 3rd-ranked player efficient rating. He's got right under LeBron James, if that gives you any indication of how good he is on a play-by-play basis. And you've got Curry, who's a total of just about 4 points lower. Chris Paul also accumulates 2 more assists per game. Not to mention he brings a pretty elite skill set as far as defense is concerned. Not only on switches, but on-ball defense and his ability to pick the lane. I'll give you that Curry is good at swiping the ball from a player, but there's not really many players who can anticipate plays on defense as if they were on offense like Chris Paul. So he's probably, I want to say he's had the 2 best statistical seasons of a point guard in NBA history, and that's when he averaged 22 points a game, had 12.5 assists, 3.5 steals, played great defense. You're talking about a guy who's shooting 47% from the field, 44% from the 3-point percentage. Great all-around player. That being said, can Chris Paul catch and shoot the ball and score you 12 points in 45 seconds? That's the argument here, is because Steph Curry is an amazing player. He brings a different skill set. He's got 9 assists. He's clearly a great distributor and ball handler and makes great decisions. A lot of that's probably from Mark Jackson's tutelage. However, I would say that if I'm going to take a player to start a franchise with, it's still Chris Paul. If I'm taking a player that's better this year, it's still Chris Paul. Steph Curry, you got 1 more year to show me what's up, because you're probably going to take this title next year. But I'm sorry, I just don't see it right now. I don't think that you could possibly be better than a 27-year-old Chris Paul.
And honestly, I think, like you said, the facilitating factor is what puts Chris Paul over. Yeah. Because right now, you're seeing amazing physical performance out of Stephen Curry. But he's still got about 4 turnovers a game. That's going to get you. That's something that the team's getting better on, keeping a handle on their turnovers. So, definitely. Right now, I'd take Chris Paul. However, when it's all said and done, don't be surprised if we're looking back after both these guys were retired. We're looking back, and Stephen Curry, history will show, would be a far better player. Because I think Stephen Curry's a guy whose ceiling is still pretty far away. Because he's not just, he's an intelligent point guard, makes good plays, distributes the ball, but he's also got this Reggie Miller aspect to him, to where he can just drop it. Shoot from anywhere, put him in the clutch, I think we're still yet to see that true performance out of Steph Curry, where he just absolutely breaks a team's back in the middle of a major playoff game. And it might be against the Clippers, just with the rivalry these two teams have had. If you guys are looking for good games in the playoffs, pray to God it comes to Clippers and Warriors. It's going to be amazing.
A few things I'd like to point out before we go to the next. I agree it's Chris Paul right now. Stephen Curry does have the potential, but to make up that gap, he's hit 4.2 turnovers right now. That's an issue, like Sam was saying. If he cuts that down to like 2.5 with this shooting, his offensive ability, the gap in defense is very minimal, and that will make up the gap. It's just those turnovers are just backbreakers when you give great teams in the playoffs extra possessions. So right now, Chris Paul, Curry does have a chance. Quick answer, yes or no, before we move on to the next one. Best shooter in the league, Stephen Curry. Kyle, yes or no?
No.
Sam, yes or no?
Yes.
I say no. So just something really interesting to think about because it's something a lot of people talk about. So our next thing we're going to talk about, this one hopefully should go really quick just because we're already at 35 minutes over here. Joakim Noah, Roy Hibbert. Kyle Smith.
If you're asking me right now, I know Hibbert's all the rage, and I get that, but he's on an incredibly minded or gifted defensive team. There's a lot of other guys to pick up the slack, almost so much to the point where this guy can do what he does best. Stand straight up, put a hand up, bend on somebody, and block a shot. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from Roy Hibbert, but have you ever actually seen him try and get out, like, more than 3 steps beyond the hoop on defense? It's ugly. And he has a hard time getting back. And I think he's a great defensive player, and I'm really not trying to take anything away from him. But if you're asking me, it's without question, it's Noah. This guy comes in to whatever team, regardless of the coach, general manager, star player, or whatever you want to say. He's going to change the culture of a team because he cares that much. This guy has plantar fasciitis. Now, you can attest to that as a San Diego Chargers fan.
Yep.
Antonio Gates could not play with that shit, and he's a tough son of a bitch. Joakim Noah is playing basketball. I don't get me wrong. Football, basketball, you can say what you want, but fact is, playing 35 minutes on your feet is probably harder on you than playing in a football game. When you're on limited plays, you're not in every packages, play counts.
You're not blocking. Antonio Gates doesn't block anymore.
But Joakim Noah changes the culture. He's got one of the ugliest jump shots I think I've ever seen. And surprisingly, Roy Hibbert's actually developed a little bit of a three-point game. Who would have thought? But outside of that, I do like Roy Hibbert, but he's a product of a system. He's also a product of his height and his natural skills given to him, whereas Noah changes the team around him, and he also makes the best out of what is not a predominantly dominant skill set.
Going into this, 100% Roy Hibbert. You look at the stats. It's Joakim Noah. I hate to say it. Joakim Noah, like he said, he's doing more with less. Also, I would really like to see Hibbert on a worse team. I think that would be the biggest thing, is to find out how good Hibbert actually is. That, and also Hibbert's one of those players, because of his size, Noah, people are going to come up and they're going to challenge Noah. But Hibbert, they're just not going to go in the lane because he's this giant thing just blocking the lane. That being said, though, if you're talking about 2 hardest workers in the game, I'm not sure if there's anyone harder working than those 2 guys. And Joakim Noah might be the one guy who puts in more work than Roy Hibbert.
Yeah, Roy Hibbert definitely is really, really upped his game. Like, he learned to foul less, worked his tail off the free throw line to become useful offensively. I'll just add my quick 2 cents before we move on to the next one. I think Joakim Noah is a better player. He's better in pick and roll defense, a much better passer. They're both limited offensively. Hibbert probably has a better post game. They're both great on defense. Hibbert might be better on the low block. He averages more blocks per game. He's probably a better rim protector. But for me, I would rather take Noah because his offensive versatility, and like Sam said, I think he's better on bad teams than Hibbert would be. And Hibbert's 7'2" and is averaging 8 rebounds a game. There's no other dominant rebounder on the Pacers. West is good, but he's not dominant. Stevenson's good, but he's a 2 guard. George is lengthy, but he's a 3. Like, he's not averaging double figures rebounds. I know sometimes the defense takes him a little bit away, But still, if you're 7'2", I expect at least 10 rebounds. So that's something I'm a little bit concerned about.
And then you look at Noah. He's on the Bulls. He's playing with guys like Boozer and Taj Gibson, and he's getting 11.4.
Yeah.
Wow.
Granted, his team has a lot more misses than Roy Hibbert does. But
Yes, but Indiana's defense causes more misses.
true.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
Yeah.
So right here we have a battle of two really good, really exciting young point guards. John Wall, the Washington Wizards, Damian Lillard, the Portland Trailblazers. I haven't heard this comparison made too much because they play it very differently, but they're both young point guards leading, at the moment, playoff teams. Portland is guaranteed in. The Wizards could get the 3 seed in the East. They have potential. I really like their team for developing. Obviously, they're not as good as the Blazers, but would you like to touch really quick on those two? Kyle?
Yeah, I'm gonna start off by saying it's Wall. I mean, I will argue that Damian Lillard has had more success in his first 2 years, and I will definitely give you that. But I think this is kind of one of those unique situations where it's the outlier and a mean average. You know, it's really, you look at John Wall. This guy could block could get 2 blocks a game. He could have 10 assists. He can score from. He's a much more dominant inside threat than Lillard. Even though Lillard is just as good at getting to the line, I feel like Wall is much better at actually converting the N1, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that while this part of Wall's game hasn't entirely developed, I don't think there's any reason to see that he couldn't clearly make himself into a 40% 3-point per shooter. And so, you know, while Lillard is enjoying the early success and obviously an injury-free first couple seasons, I think that the defensive ability that John Wall gives you and the fact that he shows up in every single stat category, I would take John Wall.
Yeah. Right now, difference I see is this. Does John Wall make the players around him better?
We haven't seen.
When you're talking about guards, that's the big thing. And Damian Lillard, yeah, you have the argument that he's got a pretty good team around him. And I still think John Wall, we're getting to that point where his health has been getting better. We're starting to see what John Wall can do. And similar, although he's got a lot more years, similar to the Curry-Paul argument, I don't think we've seen the best Lillard. I mean, we still got a Lillard who's at 3 steals, but you put him in a playoff game, I'm going with Damian Lillard's decision making over John Wall's right now.
I like it.
Okay, for me, I take John Wall, and the reasons for this is I think his defensive potential, he's already a better defender than Lillard. I don't think that's an argument, but he has the athleticism to become a elite, lockdown, Lindsey Hunter type point guard defender. If you guys don't remember, Lindsey Hunter was his best defensive years and most memorable were probably on the Detroit Pistons, and he would come in crunch time situations when they ran a little bit of small ball. Ben Wallace wasn't hitting his free throws or was in foul trouble. They'd put Sheed at the 5, McDyess at the 4, and then run Rip, Chauncey, and Billups on 1, 2, and 3, and they would just, Billups and Lindsey Hunter would just go be all over the opposing guards and create havoc and steals, kind of like a 3-guard lineup in college. Kind of like if you remember the Illinois team with Deron Williams and D. Brown. Like, they just created havoc. And John Wall reminds me of Lindsey Hunter in terms of his defensive potential. I think he's better at distributing the ball, but I think some of that has to do with their system in terms of assists per game because Portland spreads the ball around a lot more. I trust John Wall. If you need to get 40 points from someone, I'm taking John Wall because Lillard, he can shoot better from the 3, but if you need someone to just drive to the hole 40 times in a row and get there every time, like Allen Iverson type, I'm taking John Wall. So I feel like they're both good, but I think Wall's ceiling is better. And in terms of being a leader, Lillard's a great leader. Wall, I think, is a great leader, and that's one thing that Kyrie Irving is completely missing right now. You just look at Cleveland, they have some talent, but I feel like Kyrie Irving doesn't really try on defense. He just focused on fancy dribbling moves and scoring 30 and getting his 7 assists and not really caring about how many points he scored on him against lesser players.
He's
and
looking towards free agency already.
Yeah, which is unfortunate for the Cleveland fans in the city, but Kyrie Irving's a great player, but I don't trust him to be better than either of these players, even though he may have more talent. So, Another player comparison we're going to move on to is two players who have really stepped up their game at the power forward position, sometimes center for both of them, more so for Boogie Cousins and Blake Griffin. Now, Boogie Cousins is a big favorite of mine, and he's a big favorite of Sam. So we're going to let Sam talk about Boogie, and Kyle's going to talk about a player he's really into right now, Blake Griffin. This is going to be a really interesting one.
Alright, so basically here's the thing that's with Boogie. We went over a lot when we were talking about him as the most improved player this year. I think the other thing is that Cousins would have over Blake Griffin is I think as of right now, he's got a little bit of a prettier shot and he's a better passer. With Griffin, we will see, but I don't know. I pretty much feel like the argument for Boogie Cousins has already been made when we were going over most improved. This guy is putting in the work.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting conversation, and it's one you gotta look at closely. What's more important, a dominant center who can block shots, apparently be a primary scorer, set up assists? I mean, by looking at it, you might be very inclined to just no-brainer, Boogie Cousins. But I think that Blake Griffin also offers a lot of versatility as far as scoring in the low block. He can be what I like to refer to as a game changer a little bit more so. I mean, DeMarcus Cousins is one of those guys who will win each and every possession through consistency, and that's what you truly want. But there's something to be said for a guy who goes up and dunks the ball from the free throw line, because it does get your team excited and it gets everybody else involved in it. But that being said, it's pretty hard to make the argument against DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, the guy's scoring 5 points a game with 12 rebounds.
Exactly.
And he's setting up guys left and right. I mean, the talent's always been there with Cousins. It's just a maturity issue. Whereas Blake, it's been a developmental issue. He's always been a hard worker and ready to play and tenacious player. He's just never really improved until this year, and when you've regressed for 3 straight years, and then so I would have to say that I'd go with Boogie too.
As I said, I'm a big Boogie fan. I just like to throw out a few numbers really quick. They're only a year different in age. Blake Griffin's 20 pounds lighter, and I feel that DeMarcus Cousins does more with less. He reminds me of a more athletic Zach Randolph. He gets a lot more steals and blocks. He provides a lot more value on defense, and that's something that can't be discounted. So, all right, so we're back, and we're going to talk about one more player comparison before we head out. And I'd like to bring up James Harden of the Houston Rockets versus Carmelo Anthony of the New York Knicks. Sam, would you like to start off talking about Melo?
Yeah, so we talk about Carmelo, and you've got your biggest knocks. It's like, oh, he's not going to pass it. You're not going to get much except a guy who's taking a whole lot of shots. Yeah, he's getting the points, but not overall being efficient. Although his defense has gotten better. But these are a lot of big knocks. However, if you look at it, Melo, when it comes to three-pointers, when compared to Harden, who's seen more as a three-point shooter, he's not that far off. 41% from three-point line and his two-pointer field goal percentage is 45%. And then also if you look at assists, he's got 3 assists and 9 rebounds a game. That's a big deal. And then if you go and look at what Harden's bringing in, I mean honestly, you're just not getting that much more out of him in the assist category.
Yeah, very true. One thing I'd also like to mention, if we're going to be just having this conversation, is that James Harden is in his 5th year in the NBA. This is his 2nd year playing full-time minutes in the NBA, and he already has to shoot less field goals than Carmelo does. He averages 16.5 field goal attempts the last 2 years. He's also getting to the stripe 10 times a game, which is 3 better than Melo ever done. He's also in Melo's 5th, 6th, and 7th years shooting from the 3, 29, 32, 34%. Not very good at all. So when you compare his three-point percentage at his point in his career, considering he's taken, 100 billion times more threes than James Harden has at this point in his career, Harden went from 39% to 36 to 32, so I can obviously see that there's been a drop there. But when you're getting to the line 10 times a game, which we just looked at Allen Iverson's stats earlier, that's like insanely elite, and you cannot measure that in your production, especially when you're only attempting 16 to 17 field goal attempts a game. Kevin Durant, likewise, is averaging 20. So it begs the question, if you're all of a sudden shooting 20 field goal attempts, how much better are you shooting? How much more points are you scoring? Which right now he's scoring 23.7 points per game. He does have 3.7 turnovers per game, which is not good as a primary ball handler. But to bring up Melo's rebounding stats this year, as opposed to when he was 25, he was only getting 7 rebounds a game. And his assists were like 3.5, which is about 3 less than what Harden's doing this year. And total rebounds, it was only 2 more. And you're talking about a guy who's got way more athletic, God-given talent than James Harden will ever have. Because James Harden, despite having a good size, height-to-weight ratio, the dude has handles. He's an incredibly gifted scorer from the left. He struggles a little bit going to the right, but that hasn't really hurt him at this point of his career, so I would definitely take James Harden.
All right, well, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in here. I fully support Carmelo Anthony in this situation. Bringing up the age thing, we're not talking about what Melo did when he was 24 and 25, Kyle Smith. We're talking about Melo versus Harden now. And talking about it now, Melo's shooting better from the field, shooting better from three-point, averaging more rebounds, averaging less turnovers per game with a similar usage rate, even though he's not ball handling as much. And I feel like the gap in assists has a lot to do with the talent around Melo versus the talent around Harden. Harden has Chandler Parsons, Terrence Jones, and Dwight Howard to throw the ball to, and they can score, shoot, and help Harden get those assists. That he does create good shots, though. But Melo, who does he have to throw to? J.R. Smith? He's going to shoot 30 times and make 7, and those 7 are going to be dunks.
Last year?
He doesn't have knees anymore.
You can't throw to J.R. Smith. He's
Sixth
playing
man of the
people's
year,
shoes
but the
laces.
NBA bestowed upon him that award. He's that good.
All right.
If you want to go into some of the advanced metrics, I just want to say that Carmelo's performance index rating is almost 25, where Harden's is at 21 flat, so there's almost a 4-point gap there. And Sam, you want to add a few things, it seemed like?
Yeah, quick question. So, it's interesting that we compare these two players because these two players have the exact opposite problem. So, real quick, yes or no, which one's going to be able to address their problem first? Will James Harden be able to get into the thing where he's your single star and able to carry a team before Carmelo Anthony gets to the point where he can coexist with another star?
I think that Carmelo's going to reach that plane first. I think that this year we've finally seen the Carmelo we've wanted to see since he was 20. A player who just wants to win. He's tired of not winning. So, I think that's Carmelo. I think this is the year he opts out and decides to join whoever, and I think this is the year he joins another star. And I think you're going to see him play like an unselfish player.
I think that Melo will get there first, but I think a lot of that, like Kyle says, has to do with his age. I don't think he's going to opt out of New York. I don't think he's going to give up that extra $30 million, but I think that they're going to finagle some way to get some decent player there that's going to really help him. Chandler's going to get healthy. You can dump any contract in the NBA. Someone's going to take that JR deal somehow. They have no problem trading first-round picks. I like Tim Hardaway Jr. a little bit. Ray Felton, if he drops another 15 pounds, can be really good this year. That's always been one of his biggest issues is weight. And I just feel that James Harden is still very young and has a lot of great basketball ahead of him. And I feel like he'll be better later on when he realizes that he doesn't have to be the point guard. That's his issues, because I think a lot of it is I have to be the point guard, the entire guy running this half-court sets, and then that also loses focus on defense. And I think that they both have defensive opportunities, but I feel like Melo's a little bit better right now on-ball defender because he guards a lot of power forwards as well, and they're not as talented. So, and then James Harden, he still likes to try to guard the number ones, but he doesn't put in the effort, so they get burned a little bit more. So, I mean, what's the point of wanting to guard number ones if you're not going to put the effort in? That kind of just hurts your team. So that's kind of my last thoughts on that question. So, that about wraps up. Anything we want to touch on really quick that we didn't mention?
Thanks for having me on your guys' podcast. It's been a good time. Very thorough NBA discussions. Kyle?
I just want to mention how great of a basketball player DeMarcus Ware would have been if he had opted for basketball instead of football. The man's 6'4", 260 pounds. It's very reasonable to think that he could have been the Ben Wallace of shooting guards. Moving along, though.
You mean PJ Tucker?
Go Cowboys. I don't know. I was just bringing up the Ben Wallace 260, 6'8", play center, but I'm really short.
I don't think there's a single person in the world that would argue with that.
You might be the only one that would think about DeMarcus Cousins as a shooting guard. I'm just throwing it out
Or
there.
DeMarcus Ware.
Well, DeMarcus Ware. But
DeMarcus Ware or DeMarcus Cousins. I'm sure you have those dreams. You probably have them dreams of playing point and shooting guard. I got the DeMarcuses in the backcourt.
What I
I'm down to see
dreams
DeMarcus
are,
Cousins play defensive tackle.
Oh, he could easily do
Yeah,
that.
let's put it on.
What if they were next to each other on the line, Kyle? How many sacks is Ware getting now? 36?
I don't even know if I want Boogie on the defensive line. I just want him to stand up there and play linebacker and just like he is.
JJ Watts has nothing on
Yeah. Like.
Anywho, thanks for listening. Hopefully we got a new podcast coming next week. We'll talk about the Super Bowl, the game, wrap up the NFL season, maybe have a couple guests on. Later.
See ya.
Woo.